Let's have a chat to the Home Affairs Minister Peter Dutton. We did so just before we came on the air. We talked about everything from our old mate KK, the climate change hypocrisy of the Labor Party who love flying around on jets that you pay for. But most importantly, he's using his power to make sure that people who are being crowbarred off places like Nauru, supposedly for health reasons, well, some of them are bad people who shouldn't get here.
Well, there are about 6 people who have come already that I have really grave concerns about, but I just haven't been able, under the law, to keep those people from coming to our country. And I think it's really, the case that we've been given a bad law here in the medevac bill, and I just don't think Australians realise how bad it is for a government to be compelled to bring somebody to our country when we're worried about their criminal history, we're worried about their character, and yet we're compelled to bring them to our country, even if they don't need medical assistance, they're accompanying somebody who does. I think it's bad in terms of the long-term interests of our country, and so in 6 cases that's happened, and in this case I've made a decision. Now, this may well go to court and it may well be overturned. My decision may be overturned, which would be frustrating beyond belief for me, but that's the law is I have to operate within, and I've pushed back as hard as I can because I don't believe this individual should come to our country, and I hope that that's upheld in the courts, but we don't know. It'll be questioned, I suspect, if it goes to court.
But we've got this scenario where the people that are left on Manus are the people who have not been able to be processed in any other fashion. We were sold this law, and we called it out at the time, but the Australian people were sold this law because the people who were left there, it's a matter of life and death, and therefore people had to be saved from the island. Well, the boss of your department, Mike Pizzullo, gave evidence to a Senate inquiry at Senate estimates that less than half a dozen of these people who supposedly are facing life and death situations ever actually end up in hospital, and even then, every single one of them have left hospital. So first this was about the kids, and then there were no kids left, and then it was about life and death, but there's not even cases that require hospitalisation here.
Well, Paul, it was a con from day one. The medevac bill was always about just getting people off Manus and Nauru to Australia. The let them stay, the bring them here campaigns that the Labor Party and the Greens have run for a long time have all been about just getting people to Australia, and they don't have any interest in the border protection policies. Kristina Keneally has demonstrated, the fact that she wants to bring now terrorists back to our country. She wants bikies to stay here instead of them being deported to New Zealand. I think it just demonstrates that Labor's completely and utterly lost the plot when it comes to border protection, and they've surrendered, and that's exactly what they did in the Rudd and Gillard years, and they're repeating the same mistakes now. But for us to be compelled to bring people here that are of bad character, I just think is beyond comprehension. I think it's really something that frustrates Australians, and I hope at some stage soon, but only with the support of Jacqui Lambie, that we can get this bill through the Parliament, and I hope that we can abolish this bad law, because we're being compelled to bring people. It's a con, and on Manus Island we're down to 4 people, and I just can't accept that we're going to have to take people from Manus or Nauru that are of bad character, but that's the situation we're put in.
So we're down to this scenario, as you say, that the only way this thing is going to be put right is if Jacqui Lambie makes the right decision. Now, I'm convinced of that. Most people watching here are going to be convinced of that. The evidence is, of course, that when people get here, as I said, less than half a dozen ended up going to a hospital, and of those, all of them ended up leaving hospital, supposedly for the urgent life and death matters. Are you negotiating with her? Do you have any sense of what arguments are swaying her one way or the other? Because when she landed in Parliament a couple of days ago, landed in Canberra rather, she was out there saying, well, look, I'll wait till the report comes back. I won't say anything this week. She's sort of getting a bit Xenophon here, where she's sort of waiting till 11:59 to make a decision. But what messages are getting to her, do you think?
Well, look, Paul, I've had a number of discussions with Jacqui. I find her very decent to deal with, and she's a person of her word. So Matthias Cormann obviously has a lot to do with the crossbench senators and Jacqui on this bill. So she'll make her own mind up, and I hope that she can support the bill, support the abolition of this bill or of this act, because I think she gets that this is bad for our country. She understands that we're bringing people here already that genuinely need medical assistance, but under the medevac bill, we've had now 132 people that have come to our country. That number increases each day as the cases come before us. We know that there's about 40 people who are refusing to have any medical attention once they've arrived. Again, you can question the motivations, but they're here and they've decided that they don't want medical attention. And as you point out, we haven't got anybody in hospital. All of the huge medical need and the level of acuity was so great that people needed to come here. It's a complete con and should be called out for that.
Now, I want to talk about the tactics of your opposite number. I'm highly critical of Kristina Keneally based on her record, okay? She wants to apply to have the job where she would have personal discretion when somebody ultimately appeals to the minister about whether I get in or don't get in. She's shown with that Tamil family that if you get loud enough on Twitter, she went to a rally where people were holding up signs that ScoMo was a fake Christian. She's immediately saying that there's a moral case for us to bring back the brides of ISIS fighters, as if every single bride in the Islamic State was an absolute innocent. And we learned today that she brushed off a security briefing so she could go into the Senate to play politics and have a crack at you. It feels like that this person who, in my view, continues to fail up through Australian politics, that she believes that the only path for the Labor Party to win is to move further to the hard left in an area where Australia, election after election after election after election, have told the people in Canberra, borders matter.
Paul, I think you're exactly right. I think she is trying to drag the Labor Party to the left. Now, Anthony Albanese, as leader of the Labor Party, has stood up at Labor Party conferences before and voted and advocated that people should vote against our strong pillars of border protection, the Operation Sovereign Borders model. He has been fiercely against for a long period of time. So in one sense, the Labor leadership don't need to be dragged to the left on border protection policy, but I just don't know when Labor will get the message from the Australian public. And Kristina Keneally, interestingly, has not even won over some of her own colleagues. So, for example, Richard Marles has distanced himself from Kristina Keneally in the call to bring the terrorists back to Australia. I know that Penny Wong, in her interview yesterday, distanced herself from Kristina Keneally, and Anthony Albanese refuses to comment on it. So I think at the moment you're seeing a bit of I think the first shot's being fired in a civil war within the Labor Party. They're fighting over climate and who can be the most severe fanatic when it comes to, zero emissions by tomorrow, and they are being dragged in different directions. But people are positioning, because my judgment is, and I've watched this for a few years now, I think Anthony Albanese might be a nice guy. He's dead in the water, and Anthony Albanese, I think, will be gone by Christmas. You've got Richard Marles positioning at the moment. You've got the member for Rankin, remember Wayne Swan's protege, Jim Chalmers, positioning as well. And, I don't know whether Kristina Keneally is looking for a lower house seat, but she's always happy, to continue on this vanity project that she's on. She loves centre stage, and maybe she'll come down and challenge at some point also. But they're barely keeping it under wraps at the moment in the Labor Party, and on border protection, they're as divided as they've ever been. And Kristina Keneally, as you point out, was at that rally. That's not the first rally she's been to, Paul. I mean, she's been to all of the rallies calling for people to come here from Manus and Nauru. If she says yes to the Biloela family, she has to say yes to the 6,000 people in the queue behind that. And if you end up with that scenario, you've lost control of our borders. People will be on boats like there's no tomorrow, coming out of Sri Lanka and Vietnam. And we're back to square one, where kids and women are drowning at sea again. They're reopening detention centres. We've closed 19 detention centres. Labor's as bad as they've ever been on border protection.
Well, one of the reasons why the government was able to win the way they did and all over the country was in part because you're the bloke who's on guard with the borders, and I think that you should always remember that that's where the quiet Australian always is. Just finally, at the start of the show, I was pointing out many of the hypocrisies of the politicians in the lower house yesterday who voted in favour of declaring a climate emergency. These are people who say that Australia basically has to pull all the plugs out, put down all the planes, get rid of all of that. But as I showed a bit earlier in the show, the hypocrisy is people like a Terry Butler, people like an Andrew Wilkie, and even a Zali Steggall. They don't walk to Canberra and they love a plane. Do you think if these people are serious, they're going to promise to hand in their Chairman's Club membership?
Well, of course. I mean, they need to start, riding the bike, the carbon neutral bike to Canberra. That's the only way in which they've got any credibility. Look, these people who are zealots, I think the Australian public's seeing through them. The Extinction Rebellion lunatics, people are fanatics. And look, you can close down the Australian economy if you see some benefit in doing that. You can say to people, look, you're struggling to pay your power bill now, it's $500, it's going to $5,000, and we want you to reduce your consumption, so turn the lights off, or if you're an older Australian, turn off your air conditioning this summer. I mean, that's what they're advocating, but I think sensible Australians see right through it, and they should be called out. I think they are at the moment. Frankly, I think the pendulum's starting to swing a bit back the other way, so we've just got to stick to the common sense position, call out the fanatics, and I mean, you see Adam Bant, in question time or in Parliament most days. It's a radical agenda which would change society as we know it, and we need to resist it and stand up for common sense.